So the first speaker today is Joe Belladonna, who is the CFO and Company Secretary of Western Areas Limited.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Thank you to Paydirt for having Western Areas here again. Nice long association with the groups, so very happy to be here again. Look, it's probably a little bit gratuitous, the title today, turning nickel into dimes or maybe dollars. Most of the people here will know that the nickel price obviously had a relatively good run over the last few weeks. Some of it that maybe we were predicting, but the last few weeks obviously not so predictable. But ultimately, it does flow through into the producers' bottom lines as we hear today. Average pricing for March was a significant step up compared to where we've been over the last few days, the last few months, sorry, and years for that matter. And obviously, it really does increase and enhance cash flow that we get out of the businesses over the last over this period. So dimes maybe not so much, more around the dollars at the moment as far as it goes. Get this going. It's just a standard disclaimer for everybody. You can read that in your leisure. Really important, I guess, to set Western Areas in context with the corporate overview. Look, the company aims to be a sustainable and profitable nickel miner, focusing on base metals and particularly nickel, building scale and maintaining financial strength while doing that. Really important, base metals, and in the context of a battery metals conference, we do think, and look, I listened to Adrian earlier and I was ready to go and close our nickel mines and open lithium mines, but I do think there's room for all battery chemistries as we head forward in that overall battery mix, whether it's range, whether it's performance, energy density, all of those different things that we talk about as far as the battery industry goes and the technology goes. There's room for everybody. All of the commodities and all of the various battery mixes are going to be required. But look, as a nickel miner, we will be an unreliable witness. We do think that nickel has one of the brightest futures and strongest futures in the overall mix, given that high energy density that they carry. Hence, the nickel focus that we maintain as I guess, the strategic platform that we build the company on. Just quickly, while the map's up there, it's important to note, for those that don't understand where we operate, the Cosmos mine, the big star in the middle, is our premier development project at the moment, long life project. You can see the port off to the west at Geraldton. If it's an export product, that would be the most likely port that it would be delivered to. And then the other big star, Forestonia, that's our current producing asset. During these nickel price times, you do want to be in production, and it's important because we're actually taking the benefit of those nickel prices now straight into cash flows and profits. And that product is delivered 50% or minimum of 10,000 tonnes into Kalgoorlie, and the balance of that is exported to China via the Esperance port at the bottom there. Safety is something that we always talk about in all of our corporate presentations. We pride ourselves on our safety record. It's very important, and we think it reflects culture and it reflects the way we operate as a business. It's always good to have those lag indicators. The frequency rates are important, but we do think that it does reflect the culture of the group, and it is important that everybody that comes to it gets to leave in the same way that they arrived. So just quickly highlight that one. ESG, I'm obviously not going to talk about every little comment there, but what we do know is important is that it's fine to produce nickel, but you've got to produce the nickel that helps solve the problem. The electric battery market for vehicles and energy storage has come about from the decarbonisation of our power sources, the way we move equipment and people around the globe. So it's important to be part of the overall solution. It's important that we don't hurt people, and it's important that we have that we're good stewards, both for the stakeholders that are obvious, the shareholders and the staff, but also for the rest of the stakeholders that are involved in the group. So we do have a bit of a focus on that, and we do try to make sure that we do the best job we can to ensure that all of those stakeholders are taken care of. I will, I guess, pivot now a bit more to Western areas specifically, especially around the actual, nickel's great, but you want to have green nickel, you want to have low carbon nickel. One of the, I guess, key platforms that we're building Odysseus on is making sure that it's the greenest nickel that we can supply into that market. We do think that there's going to be financial benefits from being able to have a low carbon unit. The Western Australian nickel space is very fortunate. Forestonia runs on mains power, which is basically the lowest carbon sort of footprint you can have. Most people have to generate, burn diesel, gas or the like to generate their power. We're getting ours straight off the main West Australian energy grid. So it has an enviable position as a low carbon unit to start with. But out of Cosmos, that's a little bit different. We will have to generate some power or buy some power in. Western Power does have a nice power line out in that area. We'll do our best to leverage off of the established infrastructure. BHP have been on record saying that they're looking at low carbon or to decarbonise that electricity grid. There's solar farms, there's wind farms. They're definitely doing a great job of removing as much carbon out of their footprint as they can. And we're hoping to leverage off of that. And one of the other key pieces of infrastructure out there is the haulage headframe. Traditionally, underground mines in Western Australia are truck decline operations. We're installing a haulage headframe and shaft infrastructure out there, which is really important because instead of having a fleet of trucks, we'll be using the headframe shaft. It's going to, you can see the numbers there, 1.5 million litres of diesel, 5 megawatts of heat, all of these, 200 cubic metres of air that we don't have to pump down the mine. All of that is saving energy, saving power, and reducing that carbon footprint for the operation. Because, like I said, the world wants clean, green nickel. It wants it to be part of the problem, part of the solution, sorry, not part of the problem. So really important as we move on. I'll talk about the nickel market for a bit. I'll probably focus on this mostly as we head forward, given that it's a battery conference and the minerals that are going into those batteries is one of the real key areas for us. I've already spoken a little bit about the nickel price. Look, I guess we can say that the last 2 weeks has been an abnormality, and it has. The invasion of the Ukraine, short positioning, financial movements, but the trend was still there. It was really quite evident even before the 25th of February and the invasion that led to the financial disruptions that we've seen. But regardless, that trend was still there. I was talking earlier, the equivalent of what we've seen happen to the nickel price, look, $15 US a pound, basically, at the end of trading last night, or for the price fix last night. If we rewind the clock back 3 months, we might have been talking $11 or a pound. It's the equivalent of the gold price going from 2,000 an ounce up to 3,000 an ounce. Could you imagine how we would all be talking about the gold price if that occurred? And that's the kind of change that we've seen happen in the nickel market over this time. But if we roll that back to maybe middle of last year, where we're at the $758 a pound, there's obviously been a significant change, and you can see the trend on the line there. You can see the trend. It was there, and I guess if we extrapolate that trend a little bit further, as we come down and we normalise that price, I think it was pretty clear where the nickel market was going. Moving on to our offtake customers. Haven't had any issues with anybody taking nickel based on price movements or any of those other issues. Nickel West, obviously internal customer, taking that minimum 10,000 tonnes, as I spoke about earlier, and then Jinchuan taking the balance of everything else that we can produce. Jinchuan was recently extended out to 30 June. There is another optional extension that can be agreed between Jinchuan and Western Areas to take that out to February next year or February 2023. And look, as we get closer to 30 June, we'll obviously be talking with Jinchuan around that. A lot of the times now, as Forestonia matures, it's about how much nickel we can produce versus being able to have a minimum commitment over and above what we've committed to for Nickel West. The offtake contract for Odysseus is something that's been very keenly talked about internally and externally over the last year. Look, it has been slowed down a little bit with some corporate actions that are well publicised. The reality is that it's an incredibly tight market for nickel. The stockpiles have been falling on a consistent basis for probably 18 months. 1,000 tonne a week off the stockpiles, 52 weeks, 50,000 tonnes of nickel gone. But the stockpiles, the visible stockpiles, is only one part of that story. A lot of the commentators were talking about ghost stockpiles and stockpiles that we can't see. The reality of those is that there is truth to that, but it looks like the market had overcalled those. So when we looked at cancelled warrants on the LME, it might say there's 80,000 tonnes of nickel, but the reality is you can only get your hands on 40,000 of those. So very much a tight market. Inbound queries coming through from the market to us from smelter operators around the world. Is there any nickel that you guys can sell outside of your current offtake contracts? So off the backdrop of that kind of market, when we went out to market the Odysseus concentrate, it definitely seen a really strong order book come in. We've seen both traditional smelter operators and our traditional customers coming to us and bidding into that. We also seen a lot of new customers, and they're generally downstream customers or potential customers that were coming to us and asking us how they get involved in the offtake process. A lot of them, especially maybe vehicle manufacturers, didn't quite understand that we sold concentrate. They thought we sold nickel sulphate, but the reality is you obviously need to take our concentrate through to some form of downstream process, smelting, refining into sulphate manufacturing, or smelting, refining, and into the other forms of getting the product into steels and the likes. So some of those people needed to be educated on exactly what we were selling, but the people that did know what we were selling bid incredibly strongly. I've been around the nickel market for nearly 17 years. If you had have asked me even 5 years ago where I would price the Odysseus concentrate, I can assure you I never would have in my wildest dreams have expected the bids we received for the Odysseus concentrate right here today. And as that market tightens, I think that potential for offtake uplifts and maintaining more of that metal in our payable rates to the shareholders and to the company is going to be very, very strong. And that contract has, like I said, been slowed down. I think if we had a clear run, we would have already probably placed that contract now for the first 2 years. But the great news for Odysseus is as we get into this tightening market and as we get more people interested in getting hold of the product, there's another minimum of 10 years worth of offtake to be sold out of this project as we move forward. And that's going to be an incredibly valuable commodity, I think, as we move forward. So look forward to potentially being involved in that. Look, battery market, I won't talk too much about that because there's another 2 days and plenty of people to talk about that. But, sorry, we'll go back. What's really important is what's really important is the yellow bars that you see there. That's the market share of 811 batteries or the production share of 811 batteries, the high nickel batteries, 8 parts nickel, 1 part cobalt, 1 part manganese. So the more nickel in the battery, obviously, the more nickel demand we see into the future. And we really think that that's going to be the dominant chemistry as we move forward. High energy density, long run range. It's really the battery for that mid-range to high-end vehicle is going to be an 811 battery. LFPs are going to be great for your smaller cars and your lower kilometre, lower weight carrying cars. But as soon as you move into that mid-range, not many of us are driving mini mokes these days. If you go in the car park, there's plenty of Land Cruisers and RAV4s and the like. They're the batteries that are going to be in those vehicles. Just quickly move on to some of our projects. It's important that if you're going to be part of the nickel market that you've got the projects that are there for now and for the midterm and for the long term now, because we think by 2030 it's going to be an incredibly interesting market. I've already seen some of the slides this morning, people that are really focused that, now we're feeding the market, but by 2030 we're seeing that supply gap and we need to bring nickel units on. They need to be green nickel units and they're going to have the price there, I think the incentive price there to bring them on. Western Areas has significant mineral mineral resources, both all in the class 1 in the sulphide variety, which we think is also really important. So yeah, 1 million tonnes of nickel in resources, 250,000 tonnes of nickel in reserves, and they're the ones that we're mining today. So that's underpinning 10 years worth of production at our sort of current rates. And like I said, 2030, you've got to be in production, you've got to have the reserves to do that, and we're demonstrating that clearly. We've got 600 plus thousand tonnes in our what we call our high quality resources. Quick back of the envelope, if we've got 600,000 tonnes and 33,000 US a tonne, it's the nearly $20 billion worth of nickel in the ground. Obviously, you've got to mine it and refine it and get it into the market. That's not the true value of it, but it just goes to show the leverage that we have to that high nickel price. That's just the reserve profile or the production target that we have there. Like I said, based on reserves, it's not nickel to be found, nickel to be discovered, or nickel to be extended. That's nickel in the ground, high quality JORC resources that will be mined from now until out to 2031, and a blend of both Odysseus and Forestonia. Look, great shot of the Cosmos operation. Just to put that into perspective for the people that aren't familiar with it, that is the old Cosmos open pit that was mined by Jubilee Mines. That's the portal that gets us underground. There's a chiller unit there. The haulage headframe that I discussed is being built at the moment. I'll show you some updated pictures of that. Just keep that box cut in your mind because it does look quite different now. There's workshops and all of those things are all established out there. A real restart of the existing operation there, but with a brand new ore body, not remnant mining an old ore body or any of those sort of things. Straight into a new ore body with all new infrastructure which we're installing now. The address for Cosmos is really important. It sits within sort of 20 kilometres of Mount Keith, Nickel West's large lower grade mill, and then Leinster 20 k's to the south, which is more of a medium grade, similar to what Cosmos produces or what the Odysseus project will produce. It's been benefiting off of established airstrips, roads, power lines, all of those things that I talked about earlier. So it's a relatively light touch to bring it back into production, which is good. But like I said, that key is the long life reserve for this project. Just to put it into perspective, where we're mining at the moment, I'll show you where we're up to, and I've really already touched on the majority of these sort of key points. Long life, it's the higher grade material, 2+% in the reserve, 164 kilotonnes of nickel just in the Odysseus ore bodies, which are the ones in the lower area there, so north and south, and AM6 is now in reserve as well, another 50 or 47,000 tonnes of material at AM6, and that's what underpins that 10-year life and that 200,000 tonnes of nickel. Better to show you where we're actually at the moment. So the dark green is areas that are actually completed. The haulage head shaft is one of the key pieces of infrastructure. It's a fresh air intake. It will be equipped for the skips for the shaft haulage. And at the moment you can see there's not much left to go on the initial raise boring and development of that shaft. There's about 5 metres, I think, left of the raise boring to be completing that second leg. And from there, Ruck will come in. They'll start equipping that shaft and heading into that, coming into production around March, April next year for the haulage head frame. But this financial year, that is, October last year, we did mine first ore from Odysseus South. So we are stockpiling that material now while we refurbish the mill and establish the life of mine processing infrastructure there now. That is the critical path to getting us into concentrate production now, is the actual construction of the mill. We're on ore. The haulage head frame was always coming in after the mill was completed, and GR Engineering are doing that out there for us now, and looking like the December quarter we'll be producing first concentrate. Just I guess a picture of the update of what the shaft haulage infrastructure looks like now. So the shed is where all the motors and the winders will be for the head frame. There's a piece of the winder being lifted into position with the overhead crane inside there. So that fit out has started. All the electrical work and fit outs inside there is completed. The big platform there looks like an altar to deliver your nickel onto. Behind that is actually the hole in the ground, or where the shaft actually comes out, and and the ore comes out of. On top of that would be a large bin. From that bin, it comes down into a conveyor belt, which takes it either to the mill or up to the waste dump. So it's quite efficient once it hits that head frame. It doesn't really need to be trucked or rehandled up until it gets to the mill. So again, removing trucks, removing diesel. Then that little box there, everybody thinks, oh, is that where the shaft sits on? No, that's just the fresh air intake. So there'll be big chiller units put on that, and that's where we'll bring fresh air down into the mine. The next thing, I guess, that we will see on surface now is actually the erection of the large frame. Look, it actually sits about 100 metres in the air. It is actually quite a structure, so that'll be a real, I guess, beacon to be seen when that goes up, and that should happen in the second half of this year. AM6 is a feasibility study that we've been working on. It is a reserve. It's more about integrating it into the Odysseus ore bodies to get a more cohesive plan to be able to mine all three ore bodies in unison. And it de-risks a plan having multiple ore bodies and multiple headings in place. The feasibility study itself has been delayed by access to consultants. It is a tight market for consultants at the moment, and we have been trying to get that integrated study out. It's probably not going to change the envelope of or the reserve position overly. It's more about making sure that all of the ore bodies work together, both from a mining front through the mill. They don't impact each other's recovery, and about maximising that recovery as we head forward with that integrated plan. What's probably more important, and I guess from a battery minerals context and in the ability of Western Areas to make sure we're here not just for the now and the medium term, but much further into that long term, is the Mount Good project. The Mount Good project's 300,000 tonnes of nickel at the moment. It's in JORC resource, which is really important. So it's, again, not nickel that needs to be found, it's in the ground. It's a large ore body. It's very similar to the Mount Keith style ore body that I talked about, which is 15 to 20 kilometres north of where we are at Cosmos. Nickel West are mining Yakabindi at the moment, which is really right on our footprint. There's a haul road that goes really close to where we operate at the moment, straight up to Mount Keith. But for us, it's about that long-term view. If we think that nickel is going to be strong in the longer term, and I think most of us that are involved in nickel would certainly say that we think nickel is going to be here for the longer term, Mount Good is one of those projects that comes into play, especially when we start looking at the nickel price and some of that incentive pricing that's needed to bring these projects on to fill that gap, and to fill that gap with good quality low carbon nickel. This is a project that we think is there for the future. It's nickel banked, and it'll be a larger low grade operation, no doubt about that. But when we talk to people that are involved in downstream processing and battery manufacturing, this is the kind of project with a 10-year, 300,000 tonnes sort of outlook, 30,000 tonnes of nickel a year, that gets them excited, because that can underpin downstream processing facilities, and it can underpin really collaborative and really high quality joint venture relationships between ourselves and those types of operators. Because I think Dan's said it more than once that as we head forward, we don't think it's going to be how much are you going to pay for your nickel. It's going to be where are you going to get your nickel from, because that tightening market is definitely coming down the line. And this is where this project really fits into that sweet spot of being a large class 1 style of nickel that can feed those downstream processes for a long period of time. I'll quickly move on to Forestonia. When we talk about being part of the solution, the heap leaching activities, look, they're trials at the moment, and they're a hybrid between production and test work, but we're developing low carbon alternatives for the market as well. What you can see there is a heap leach of our waste material, our scat material out of the mill. That's being heap leached. It's precipitating accrued nickel sulfate into that pond. That pond's taken through a processing plant we have at Forestonia called the MREP. The MREP actually then precipitates out a 45% nickel product that then bypasses the refinery process. So instead of going concentrate, smelter, a lot of heat, a lot of energy, a lot of footprint, it actually bypasses that process and goes straight into the refinery. In the lab, we've precipitated sulfate crystals straight out of this machine. We don't think that's the way we want to go long term at the moment with it. But then that high grade mixed sulfite, or sulfide precipitate product goes straight into the refinery and bypasses a significant carbon footprint. So they're the kinds of other things that we're doing, and that's a life extension project at Forestonia as well. So not just, I guess, the traditional avenues of producing the nickel the way we do it, but also then looking at ways of reducing our carbon footprint as well. I have to talk about my tie. I believe I'm the only CFO talking. I've got a minute, so I'm going to digress. I think I'm the only CFO talking. I thought I'd be the only one wearing a tie, and the guys have supported me here. Victor sent me a message last night and said I have to wear a tie, and if I did, he would make a large personal contribution to the local communities up in Kununurra and Warman and the like. So it was good that I wore the tie, and Victor's going to do a contribution for the local communities up there, which is great. And again, the only CFO, so I'm really sorry, but I won't do any bad CFO jokes, but I will note that I did do my hair especially for this morning.